last night. I have all this stuff to do it, and I taped it on the inside.
I was waving at you, making sure you're awake over there.
Everybody's mic on. Yeah. Welcome to Carlisle Local School District regular board meeting for October 28th, 2024. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school's district's business. It is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is time for public participation during the meeting. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Miller,
Here.
Mrs. Morris,
Here.
Mr. Jewell,
Here.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Here,
Mrs. Milligan.
Here. Thank you. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any visitor comments? Okay, let's go on and move to the treasurer's report.
Well, before we do that, we have administrative reports.
Oh, I forgot, sorry.
That's okay, something new. So everybody should have a copy of the administrative reports. There were a few more this month, as I think I shared with you before. Every month you'll have one from the principals and special ed director, and then every other month you'll have food service, transportation, and facilities. And then I think 3 times out of the course of the year, we'll also add then at that time athletics as well. So for example, next month, John will be here. And we'll also recognize some students during that point too. So everybody should have a copy of the reports. I sent them out this morning. If you have any questions on anything, now would be a good time.
Anyone have any questions?
Okay.
Good, thank you.
We've now completed administrative reports.
Okay, if we can move on to the treasurer's report then?
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I do have a couple non-action items before we get started here. First is an audit update in full swing. We have our state audit going on. He's been on site 1 full day. Mostly it's just emails and providing information, scanning and sending stuff that way. You should have received an email that 2 minor audits were completed, our STRS audit and our SERS audit, for the amount of dollars that we send to those retirement pension programs on behalf of our employees. And both those audits came back perfectly clean. So I guess I wasn't happy that we were selected, but I'm happy now that it's over and everything was all clean and we get a good report from that. So I'll just keep you updated as we go along on the audit, which kind of leads me into the second non-action item. I'm pushing to have our audits done a little bit sooner this year than what we have done in the past. And the reason for that is I'm going to have a gentleman here next board meeting to make a presentation to you all. And I told him 4 or 5 minutes. Don't get worried about that. About basically refinancing our house here, called bond refunding. So when we sold the bonds in 2017, they were sold and we were given, not given, those bonds were sold for the money to build this facility that we're in. When those were sold, after 8 years, we were allowed to go out and look at basically reselling those, paying them off and reselling them, basically refinancing the house. It's called bond refunding. And preliminary numbers on it is that we can save the taxpayers here money on their taxes. It's not anything that goes into the school budget. It's not any direct money into our school at all. It is strictly about taxes being paid by the community. And like I said, preliminarily wise, it looks like we can save about $1.7 million by refunding. So it's definitely worth looking at. Next meeting, the plan is to have a gentleman here to explain it much better than I can explain it, which is why I invited him here. And I'll have a resolution on the agenda for approval to move forward. All that resolution will be is that we can look at it. It doesn't commit us to anything. It just means that we start the extensive paperwork that I'll have to take care of on our end. But at least it gets the ball rolling, and we would not be eligible until around June of 2025. But it is a long process. We will have to get a rating again as a district. The good news is we're in much better financial shape 8 years since then. They're confident that we'll get a higher bond rating than what we did last time. And with a higher bond rating means that you get a lower interest rate. With the lower interest rate means that's less interest that has to be paid back, which means a lower tax rate for the community. So I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on that. That'll be the next meeting on November the 18th. And again, it gets the ball rolling, and it doesn't commit us that we absolutely have to do that. But it puts us in a position that in next June, if the market is still favorable, that we can go ahead with that process and try to maximize the savings instead of waiting another year.
Thank you.
Okay? So that's my non-action items. Action items, we need approval for the last regularly scheduled board meeting minutes, which was September the 23rd.
Do we have a motion? Mr. Jewell, first.
Second.
Second, Mrs. McIntosh. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Next is the financial report that's part of your packet. Again, no real surprises as part of the financial report. Next meeting, again, the November meeting, will be the five-year forecast, which I'll get a little bit more extensively into the finances at that point, which is good timing because the five-year forecast will also be part of the bond refunding. So for that gentleman to be here. So as far as this month, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. It is what it is. No surprises one way or the other.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Milligan, first. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Jewell. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Then, next we have a series of donations. First, we have a donation by the Carlisle Athletic Facilities Committee to the athletic department for wrestling supplies, which was the money that was donated to the campaign committee for wrestling. And wrestling has identified getting a new score clock and a new wrestling dummy for the program in the amount of $2,120. Second is a donation from the Athletic Facilities Committee to our athletic facility repair account with the school in the amount of $116,000 and change, which is the first payment for the track, the down payment that we have to make since the contract has been signed and move forward. Next, we have the donation to the special ed department, and that is from Mr. and Mrs. Eggleston for their donation in memory of their granddaughter, Isabella Gardner, who recently passed away. Isabella was a beloved student and attended Carlisle schools from preschool until her graduation in 2024. The family donated this standard as a tribute to her legacy, which will help future students access classroom activities more easily. So we definitely want to thank them after approval of the donation. And then last, we have a donation from the Carlisle Lions Club, $500 for the neediest kids of all time.
And just real quick, too, the information about the standards, actually, the picture of the product and the information Dan just read is in the report as well, too, so, from Emily.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Morris first. Do we have a second?
Second.
Was that Ms. Milligan, second? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's my extensive report for this month.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so for the superintendent's report underneath non-action items, actually I have several different things for a district update. First, I just wanted to give a quick, brief update on security things that we are looking at. Back in September, we met with our company who does our phones and cameras and door systems, ESI, to start an audit because as we look through the cameras that we have, right now, I think there were 184 cameras listed within the district. We were noticing that not all the cameras were operating, and we were having a hard time dealing with some of the things we were seeing. So we brought them in to do a phone audit, and it took them several weeks to go through everything. So out of that, we're in the process now of looking at the map to try to figure out what are some areas that we can update with some cameras. Good examples of that is right now we do not have cameras in any of our office hallways. So if something were to go missing or something were to happen, we'd have no idea until they went out into the main academic hallways, and even then you may not track it. So those are some areas. We have a couple areas where some stairwells that we have some blind spots. Basically what we're trying to do is just make sure that everything we have is accessible and is clear. We're also looking at some phone changes. One of the things I was surprised with when I came in is there's no way for staff to do any kind of alerts or all calls if something were to happen. The only place you can do that in is in the offices, which to me is a safety concern. Our teachers, if something happens, should be able to notify the staff of incident happening in the room, especially if you think about how big our building is. If something happens in the elementary, we may not know about it in a timely enough fashion down at the high school wing. So we are working for a very insignificant cost, looking at it, to be able to offer the option that every phone will have the ability to do an all-call. We actually, I think last week sometime, we spent about 40 minutes or so in the offices just trying to detail where phones can be heard when you do the all-calls and what can be heard. So trying to tie up that system. And then looking at some of our door lock issues in regards to making sure that A, they all lock as they're supposed to, and that we have access to quick lock things when needed. So those are some things from security. We also do have our first building-wide safety meeting tomorrow after school. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of things come out of that. It's relatively easy meeting to create. We're just looking to see what are some safety concerns that our staff have in regards to things that are going on, and talk a little bit about some of the updates we've had. Mentioned last meeting that we are in the process and discussions about the idea of a school resource officer. Dan and I met with Chief Rogers last week. We do have some progress on it. We don't have final figures, but what we do know right now is that it'll be a cost that will be shared by both the school and the city. Percentage-wise, we'll get a little bit better of an idea later, but we do know that that is something that we're sure, that part of what we're dealing with right now is they have not finished their negotiations yet, so we can't lock in on a final price as a result of that. But we know that the cost, if we end up going this route, will be something that will be shared by both. Depending on the amount of time, my suspicion is the school will pay a little bit higher of that share, but as of right now, we are the only school district in Warren County to not have a school resource officer. So we're looking through that, and then we've got to, of course, deal with the hiring process, which Chief Rogers has said that the school will have a large hand in that opportunity. In November, I've actually asked Chief Rogers to be here. So at the end of that meeting, we will go into executive session to talk with him a little bit more about details, and then depending on how that meeting goes, potentially pending they're finished with negotiations as well, in December, potentially put something in paper, and then hopefully start the process of maybe by mid-year, by second semester, we'll have something in place. I want to talk just a little bit too about some of the safety communications, because I think there's just some, I don't want to say misunderstanding, but I think there's a lot of unknown information that people seem to want to make up as we go through these. I mean, yes, we have had a number of incidences that we've had to communicate on. Part of my belief is it's very important to be open about what takes place, and no matter what the incident has been. It's not that we've had all these threats, whereas, obviously the most recent, we did have something that involved a staff member, but most of the incidences, it's just a general FYI and open communication with our community. There's not been anything that we've overly had drastic concerns on of being threats, but I think anytime you hear anything along those lines, people automatically want to start to assume that there's something bad going on. When it comes to communication, the one thing that I've always stated is the first thing we need to do is address and make sure that our students are taken care of and our staff, and then we will send communication out to the community. I had a parent who called me, I think after the incident with the young man who brought the airsoft gun to school, and stated, why didn't we know about this sooner? And my response is, we have to make sure because it happened in the evening, we weren't able to get things communicated until the next day. And I stated to that parent that our job is to make sure that we report factual information, not fictional, and we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to address the families and any staff members that may be involved before we send information out. So it was one of the things I wanted to make sure that we reiterated back with you. If you hear that, it's make sure that our first focus is making sure staff and students are protected and addressed, and then we will send information out to the community after we've reached out to parents and everybody else that need to know first. So I thought it was important to bring that up. As you are aware too, I did send out some information this afternoon about Senate Bill 29, which is the student privacy information. As we talked earlier, this is a bill that was approved back in the summertime. It went into effect on October 24th. The biggest thing with this is because it is involving the safety and privacy of students' information. I think the way the bill is written, the intent is whenever there's a safety concern to themselves or to the school, that is the intent when Senator Huffman presented this bill. But I think the other part of it is the communication aspect, because the whole reason this bill was started is because the school district that this happened in did not communicate with the family until after consequences were levied. And I think that's why this whole piece came out, again, an open communication. I can assure you with our principals sitting out here that if something takes place that involves the safety of a student, we will follow through and make sure parents are aware before disciplinary action takes place. I think we've been very upfront and honest about that throughout, even prior to myself coming here to Carlisle, but I know that's a message that I have spent many meetings talking about with our administrative group. And the other part of it, it's just making sure that we are open about the programs that we use, which is not something we've had to do before. We are actively putting that list together. We technically do have until August 1st to actually put the list out of the programs that are used for curriculum, testing, et cetera, but we'll probably have something out by November 1st just to be ahead of the game. It's better to be, again, over-communicate than not communicate at all. But I know Senate Bill 29 is something that we are going to see some more changes coming forth on. I think there's going to be some clarification of the language. Wanted to throw out some positive happenings. Obviously, we're all well aware that our first home football game for playoffs is, I think it's since 2014, I believe was the last one, from what I think I was told. So we will be hosting Lima Bath for a playoff game here this Friday. Our marching band will be competing at state finals this upcoming Sunday at 7 o'clock up at Piqua for a superior rating at state. And then the other thing which I think I've shared a little bit of information on, but we are hosting a career fair in conjunction with Ohio Means Jobs out of Warren County on the 20th of November from 8 to 11 o'clock for our students, grades 7 through 12. It's going to be in our gym. I think right now we're at 66 vendors who will be coming in for that. So I'm excited about being able to create that opportunity. And the last thing that I'll report on for my non-action items is we are in the process of, hard to believe, starting to think of the school calendars for the 25-26 school year and the 26-27 school year. My goal is in January to have 2 calendars for us to approve for those 2 years. We did send out a survey that I think you guys saw as well too for our staff that asks a series of questions in regards to thoughts for those calendars, and a lot of consistency with what we've seen this year in particular. And then the last thing we have coming out to our staff too will be a curriculum survey. As I've shared before, one of my main focuses is definitely looking at what we're doing from a curriculum standpoint, talking about what we're doing in regards to our report cards and the data that we use to help students grow. Where I'm not as much about the testing, where my main belief is about making sure our students are growing every year. And that curriculum survey that we'll be sending out focuses a lot on that. I'm asking a lot of questions about what are you using for data, how are you using your data, what supports do we need, what will help us do better basically with what we're doing. I mean, we've been very fortunate with the positive progress we have made with the tests, but there's always room for improvement. There's always room for growth, and I think that that's something that this survey will help us utilize. So those are my non-district or my non-action items. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So moving on to action items. That was probably the longest report I've given.
Let's keep it that way.
Thank you. Oh, you want me to keep giving long reports?
No.
Oh, okay.
Make that the longest ever.
So underneath the action items, the first one is classified employment. Approving Ross Campbell, a student, as a sub-custodian, and then approving Amanda Flores as a sub-custodian. I think Jimmy can let you know that that's been a headache of his over the last week or so. It's just the time of the year. I mean, we've had a lot of absences, but he's communicating it, and I think it's important to do that, so. So we need a motion or an,
Yeah, do we need we
Yeah.
need a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. McIntosh, the first.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
number 2 is the supplemental resignation of Emily Easton as assistant varsity boys track coach.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Morris first, Mr. Jewell second. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Exciting, we're looking to establish a high school boys and girls bowling team as both a varsity and junior varsity sport starting this school year. The supplementals will be a head coach on Schedule 3, and depending on participation numbers, which based on what we've seen, we will have an assistant coach at Schedule 4, and this would make the 6th SWBL bowling team for us. So very excited about it. John said this is something they talked about last year, but for whatever reason, didn't get going, and he approached me with it. I said, let's go. So,
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. McIntosh first,
Second.
Mrs. Morris second. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
and we will actually, now that that's been approved, to post the position, or post the coaching openings for tomorrow, so. Number 4, I'm not going to read through all these. There's a long list of supplementals for employment for basically spring and winter coaching seasons.
Okay, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Jewell first. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mrs. McIntosh. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
The second set is pulled out separately due to Ms. Milligan's involvement with this. So this is to hire 2 additional, but family-related, so it's been pulled out.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Mr. Jewell's first, second.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Morris. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Abstain.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
And that completes my report.
Thank you. Do we have any legislative reports?
Mr. Fisher mentioned the big item right now, but also something coming ahead down the road. It's been talked about in Ohio, but nothing has been really voted on. And it's something called Alyssa's Law. And what that means is that staff members at the school would have a wearable panic alert button. And I just have, it's probably going to be unmandated. of
There's no
course.
probably, it will be
Um,
unmandated. There's no probably to it, it will be
I mean,
unmandated,
it will
unfunded.
yeah.
Unfunded.
But it seems like there are some smaller schools, and I know one school in Cincinnati that is piloting it right now. And they showed a picture of it, it's about the size of a badge, thicker, I don't know, like kind of the thinnest remote you could imagine, and it has just a few buttons on it. So that's something that will be coming up.
My understanding is it's a discussion right now. I just heard about this for the first time as well on Thursday. My understanding is actually it could be a lame duck discussion. I have a feeling it's going to be pushed off to next year because lame duck, they're going to focus on a few other things right now, so.
Some other states have already implemented this, not just a handful.
There's just a handful.
Not very many, but it's definitely something to think about that we're going to need to implement and pay for
Yes.
without extra money.
Okay. And do you have anything, Ms. Milligan, for MVCT?
Yeah, Miami Valley CTC had their regular board meeting on October 8th, and it was just a regular board meeting. The next one is November 12th.
Do we have any old business? Any new business?
We have play coming up before our next meeting,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yes, thank you. The weekend of the 15th and 16th. It's the same as when the band goes to Grand Nationals on that Friday, so that 15th, 16th, 17th, if I remember right. So yes,
Yes.
I'm glad you said that. I forgot that
And
altogether.
I think there's only 3 shows. Sometimes they do
There are.
2 on Saturday, and they're just doing the 1.
Yeah,
So
I
you-
thought that, yeah, you
There's
could be
3,
right.
yeah. So you don't want to miss it.
Did you hear that, Quentin? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for
Thank you from
reminding us
afar.
there, Molly. Okay, and we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Jewell first. We have a
Second.
second. Second, Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan,
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mrs. Morris,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller.
Yes.
Just a reminder that our next meeting
6:25.
is earlier. It's a week earlier next week. It's the
Oh,
18th,
yes.
or next month.
Yes.
The 18th, not the 25th, so, because of the holidays.
So we'll see you in like 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Can't wait.
All right.
Don't
Thank
forget
you.
the
Thanks,
election.
everybody.